Welcome, everybody. Is everybody here, or is there anybody missing from Burke Museum Caverns last night? Did everybody show up? I recognize 98% of the faces, but not everybody. So for those of us who may not have met everybody yet, I'd sort of like to get a breakdown here. How many are academic law librarians here? That's the vast majority. I got a good one there. How many are firm librarians? Ah, interesting. And government. And let's see, Willie. He has his own category. And we also have some special guests here. There's Ken Hirsch from AALL. So if you haven't met him yet, he's going to be around all day. He'll be talking over the business meeting time, so feel free to say hi to him. And again, I want to thank Alana. Is Alana here? She's probably out front, but there she is. Alana, everybody came back from the museum. No one was lost, so everybody's here. And now I would like to introduce our host, who's done such a great job and wonderful facilities and great person, Penny Hazelton.
Could I welcome you again to foggy Seattle? Sunbreak this afternoon is what I'm told, but who knows what the weatherman has in store. Although I have to tell you a little story. The last time we did an event outside, we have an annual picnic to start the year, and Rob Britt, who is organizing it this year, went to a website that did minute by minute rain and sun, and we have always been outside for 30 years, right? So we didn't want to break that. So at 10 minutes to 12, it's raining. At 5 minutes to 12, it's raining, and Rob is going, but at noon, the sun comes out, and it did. So we just wait. You just have to wait long enough, right? So anyway, we're very happy to have you here in Seattle. It's a great set of programs, and I have loved working with Alana and with the programming committee to try to make this an easy transition. Anything that goes well is Alana's responsibility. Anything that's screwed up is mine. I'm delighted to welcome this morning our Senior Associate Dean, Greg Hicks, who's going to bring greetings from our Dean who's ill today. But I know that you're all happy to be here and that there's a lot to learn today, so I will not further introduce him except to say that he loves the Far West almost as most of the rest of us do. So thank you, Greg.
Thanks, Dave. And I even recognized Willie when I came up. You know, just happy days in Laramie and drives through Muddy Gap. So anyway, I just wanted to say a very warm welcome to all of you. We're really honored to have you here. Your gathering is so important to the field and for all of us who are doing scholarship, working with our students. Your work is just indispensable. It's just essential to us. And the fact that you're gathering together and maintaining your sense of just colleagueship and communication, it just means strength all across the board for all of the university libraries, county, city, municipal libraries, firm libraries, and just to have that energy going, it's everything that we need. Just one small anecdote along those lines. I was writing an article a few years ago and was needing to get back into the weeds and some legal archival materials in the American Southwest. And I had the sense that there was something out there that just was not turning up. And I was working with one of the archival librarians at the New Mexico State Museum in Santa Fe. And I asked, would you please just have one more look? And for reasons for which there were no reasons, he decided to have a look not under the case or the subject matter that I was looking for, but to try one of the names of one of the lawyers in this late 19th century firm in Santa Fe. And so he searched by the lawyer and found in a banker's box with a pile of records including railroad organization papers, articles of corporations, litigations in this old railroad dispute, found the stuff I was looking for. Completely misfiled, in a sense lost to the archives because they've been put in the wrong box who knows how many years ago. And I was thinking, this is the right stuff. This is archival librarianship at its best, where you go beyond even where you suspect you might find something just to try wild goose chase. Sometimes they turn up the gold, and this one really did. And I was one grateful researcher. It just made the piece of work possible. It really did. It would only have been a notional project without the hard data. And so all of us, in ways that are both spectacular and just everyday, are so deeply grateful and have reason for that gratitude for all you do, and especially as this world of information retrieval just gets more complicated, more intricate, everything from online resources to the old hard books and paper, everything you do just requires such integration of so many elements. And you guys are the pros and we're in your debt. So we're glad you're here, honored to have you. So have a great session.
I'm excited to introduce our keynote speaker. He's Professor Ryan Calo, and he is an assistant professor here at the University of Washington School of Law. And you can read about him in the program. He was the founding director of the Tech Policy Lab here, and he used to work at Stanford. And he also worked in Washington, D.C. for the law firm Covington and Burling, LLP, and he clerked for a federal appellate judge. And he's had several publications, including in the California Law Review. And he got to testify before the U.S. Senate. I'm sure that was a great opportunity. And he's on several boards. He's on the Electronic Privacy Information Center, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, the Future of Privacy Forum, and National Robotics Week. He's really involved in robotics, which is really interesting, driverless cars and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, we're excited, and so I'm just going to turn the time over to him. So.
Thank you. Thanks. All right, can you guys hear me okay? I think I'm unmuted. Am I unmuted? Yeah? Everybody can hear me all right? I actually teach torts in this room, so I'm used to it. And those of you who sat over here, shame on you for sitting in, no, I'm just kidding. I try to get my students to all sit in the middle so that we can be more intimate. So thanks so much, Bonnie, and thanks, Penny, for hosting everybody. And thanks to all of you. The dean sort of said this already, but like we just love law librarians like so much. I was telling my wife that I got to present to a bunch of law librarians and how excited I was about it. Although for a moment I thought to myself, like, imagine how much research I could get done if I could just pose my questions to all of you and you could just, it'd be amazing. But anyway, I'll resist the temptation. But as Bonnie said, I spent a couple of years at Stanford Law School, and I was just blown away by the folks there, by Paul Lomeo and Sarah and George and Erica Wayne, and they were just fantastic law librarians. And when I left there, I thought to myself, because I went on the legal academic market, I thought to myself, well, I'm never going to see this again. This was just a level of service I'll never see again. And then I got to the University of Washington and worked with Gallagher law librarians. And again, it was just this incredible experience where people were just so deeply interested in what you're doing, extremely creative in their research, as the dean alluded to, and so forth. Just to give you one example, I asked somebody actually who's in this room to find people analogizing the complexity of weather. An example of people analogizing the complexity of weather to people analogizing the complexity of human mind. Okay, because I was working on something where I thought that would be a relevant data point. And this librarian found 4 instances of that, which was amazing. So the other thing I thought about was the fact that I actually have never, ever heard, and I've been around, I've only been teaching for a couple years here, but I've been in legal academy for a while. I've never heard a law professor ever complain about their librarian. Not once. Like, I've never heard anybody say, like, oh, our law librarians, you can't get to... I mean, nobody ever does that. And law professors, we like practically complain for a living, and we never ever complain. It's amazing. So, I mean, all of this is to say that you guys are awesome, and you should be really proud of what you do, but you already know that. Okay. I also talked to some librarians about, I said, I'm going to be, keynoting this thing. It's a big deal. It's this group of librarians from the region, what should I talk about? So I actually talked to a couple of librarians in different places about what I should talk about, and this theme emerged from it, which you'll hopefully appreciate. They said, don't talk about libraries. Don't talk about the future of libraries. Don't talk about digital natives. Don't tell them that everything's going on. They work in libraries. They know about libraries. And I said, all right, well, that was very freeing for me because I felt like, well, I'll just talk about what I'm interested in, what I work on, hopefully draw some parallels to what you work on, and that's how it would proceed. And so I was happy to have that advice. So what do I work on? Well, I work on, I work on the internet, internet law and robotics. Basically I work on issues of how the law interacts with emerging technology. And so I wanted to start off with a story from the inaugural, this is 1996, University of Chicago, the inaugural Cyber Law Conference, which took place in Chicago, and it was all these people who were really excited, probably law librarians among them, really excited about talking about how the law related to the internet. And so they invite this keynote, and even a poorer choice than me, to address this group. And it's Frank Easterbrook. People know who Frank Easterbrook obviously is, Judge Easterbrook. And he takes this occasion of mind you, the first ever Cyber Law Conference to just throw cold water on the whole enterprise. And just to say, there's no such thing as internet law, and there never will be. Right? It would be like me coming here and being like, robots are going to take all your jobs, so you should just go home. I mean, it's an incredibly weird thing to do at one level. And so he basically makes 2 points in his address. First, he says that internet law is like the law of the horse. And what he means by that is just that there are lots of laws that relate to horses. You know, contract law relates to horses. There's regulations for horses. There's all these things that people get hurt by horses. And so there's all these laws related to horses. But we don't have a law of the horse class. That wouldn't make any sense to organize a class around that, right? And he thinks cyber law is going to be like that, where, yeah, there's issues with the internet and law, but it's not an organizing principle. Okay, that's the first point that he makes. The second point that he makes is you lawyers and law librarians and law professors and so forth are not equipped to talk about the internet or computers. Let me just tell you, I wrote down the quote for you. He says, very colorful, "I regret to report that no one at this symposium is going to win a Nobel Prize anytime soon for advances in computer science." That's the first thing he says. Skipping, "Beliefs lawyers hold about computers and predictions they make about new technology are highly likely to be false. This should make us hesitate to prescribe legal adaptations for cyberspace. The blind are not good trailblazers." That's what he says. By the way, not a very ableist thing to say, but we'll put that aside for a moment. So, whatever you think about his first point about whether the cyber law is the law of the horse, I mean that's a live debate. People talk about internet exceptionalism, whether the internet really is different. People talk about that. That's people will hold really interesting views around that. I submit that he was just dead wrong about the second point. Okay, and so first of all, I have a lot of experience with cyber law scholars. I'm in this community. I talk to them all the time. They actually have come to know a lot about computer science, a lot about networks, a lot about the internet. Some, and not just some, but a real critical mass of cyber law professors actually have dual training. Like sometimes they have PhDs, right? Like Barbara Van Shevik at Stanford has a PhD in computer science, right? She may win a Nobel Prize in computer science. I mean, she has that training, and many others. We just minted a newly dual-trained Jonathan Mayer. He's got a PhD in computer science and a JD from Stanford Law School as well. And I have students in my class who are just from undergraduate or sometimes graduate students who have this training, right? So you do have a lot of expertise. But what was really weird about Judge Easterbrook's assumption, excuse me, in my view at least, is why couldn't we just ask somebody? Do you know what I mean? Like, why not just ask somebody who does that for a living, right? And that was kind of a weird thing, right? I mean, to say that you guys you don't know anything about technology. Yeah, but like Brenda knows a lot about technology. Why not ask Brenda about the technology, and then we'll work together, right? So that was a bizarre thing. But in 1996, and even today, it's not really all that strange, I would submit to you, because the legal academy and law schools tend to be really siloed in a lot of ways, right? We tend to be, just don't feel like we're a part of the broader university necessarily. This is a very, very, very common thing. When I ask people out, in different conferences, like whether they feel like they're a professor of law and they're a law professor, or they're a professor at the university, they inevitably they think that it's a weird question. They're just law professors. They work at the law school, and that's how our attitudes are. I'm telling you, I actually, for non-strategic reasons, just naturally, I feel like I'm a professor at the University of Washington, and my department, my unit is law. That's just how I feel about it, right? And as a consequence of that, I sit on dissertation committees in electrical engineering, computer science, psychology, information science, and so forth. I have this interdisciplinary lab that Bonnie mentioned, where I'm one of the people who's the director, but the other directors are in computer science and information school. That's where they are, and so forth. My work is deeply interdisciplinary for all these reasons. And I have not one but two classes that I teach where we conscientiously reserve room, in one case half of the room, for non-law students. So I teach a robotics law and policy course where 15 students can be law students, but the other 15 have to be from another department. And law students don't like that very much because, of course, there's a waiting list and they get annoyed by that. But we have all these other voices, and I put them in these interdisciplinary teams of four people each, and they have to have technological training in addition to legal training. So that's one of the things that I do. And so I actually think that is really important. Not my own work is really important, but rather the idea that, at least notionally, we belong to universities. Now, I understand that in many instances, Hastings is an example, and I know there's at least one person from Hastings here. Hastings is a standalone institution. It's not necessarily yoked to a big university. But even in those instances, of course, Hastings has affiliations with UCSF and has the ability to draw from the broader, academic community, which includes a bunch of different places, different departments. And so, there is that prospect for law professors even at Hastings, I would argue. But part of the problem, of course, is the fact that in reinforcing this idea that we're not part of the university as a whole is even the physical removal. The fact that sometimes campuses like Fordham isn't even where the rest of the, or Maryland isn't even where the rest of the campus might be. Okay, why do I think it's important to do this and so forth? Because it turns out, by the way, not to be easy. Like the conversations that you have initially in courses where the people have different training are hard. And the research that we do at the Tech Policy Lab is really hard. For instance, we can't even figure out, if we're authoring a paper together, we can't figure out whose name should go first, second, and third, because the norms are different in computer science and it means a different thing. I'm like, alphabetical. They're like, no, Ryan, we can't do that, right? And it's weird, but we have to have these conversations like that. Why is it important? Number one, I honestly believe that there are just very few problems left to solve in a complex society like ours by reference to any one discipline. The idea that you could just use law to solve a problem, it just strikes me as just outdated. Like there's no way that that's true, right? That inevitably economics, technology, so forth will come, psychology will come into play. I think that ship has sailed, and that's true. Second, we're all on a mission of educating law students, right? And law students almost inevitably are going to have contact with people with different training than their own, right? People who have legal training don't usually need lawyers. It's the people that don't have it and have other training that are going to need lawyers. And so for me, it's really important, and I think for a lot of us, it's really important that these folks be able to talk to each other and force themselves to talk these different languages and so forth. So those are at least the two reasons. Solving problems in an interdisciplinary way by reference to multiple disciplines and educating students on both sides to talk to each other, I think makes it really important. So that's what this brings me back to you guys in a sense, which is that if it occurs to me that while I don't have anything to say about libraries and where they're headed and what you should do, it just occurs to me that libraries, and even particularly in this region, actually, are maybe uniquely well positioned to help with this effort if you agree that it's important. Many of you have dual training, first of all, right? And that allows you a sort of facility with that kind of dialogue that you might otherwise have. I mean, I don't have dual training, I should say. I mean, I just have a JD. Many of my colleagues have other degrees, but I don't. I don't think it's necessary. You have common ground, it occurs to me, with other departments. in that you're all librarians, right? I mean, you have to share a lot with other librarians, I would think, because you're engaged in such a similar endeavor as other folks are. I don't think the disconnects are all that great between departments. I asked the library here, the Gallagher Library, a couple questions about what happens in terms of being at a big R1 research university. Do people come out of the woodwork and actually ask questions that are not law professors or law students? And I expected that there would be some, right? And the response I got is surprising even to me, which is that Gallagher apparently, correct me if I'm wrong about this, fields as many as 10 inquiries a day from non-law students, which is that's a big number in my view. 10 a day from folks who are not even affiliated with the law school. These are students from their departments. Relatively few inquiries from professors from other departments, which I think is unfortunate. And many of you maybe could report even higher usage than that. So there is a sense in which people are already using the library for different things. So there's this possibility of a law library being kind of a nexus, right, for other departments if you're interested in interdisciplinary research, if you're interested. Also, libraries, it turns out, make like really great research projects and make for really great research projects. So what I mean by that is, so my lab had this really fascinating conversation with the City of Seattle Public Library. We had a librarian who does a lot of technology work come in from Seattle Public Library. And she was talking to us about a kind of conundrum that they have there, which is that they want to be as privacy friendly as possible. Did anyone read that Washington Post article by Andrea Peterson about how librarians can't be shushed about privacy? Did you guys read that? Wasn't that interesting? So check it out if you hadn't. She's a friend of mine, and I saw her in DC, and she said, Ryan, you can be really excited about this big Washington Post cover story I have. It's about the history of librarians pushing back against government surveillance and against especially Section 215 of the Patriot Act, dating back years, and fears that librarians have voiced about the government coming and asking them about their records and the government telling them, oh, you're being ridiculous. We're not going to come. That's just overstay. We're never going to come asking for patron records. And then a couple years later, the FBI coming like, we have those patron records. You know what I mean? And them saying, no, this is what we warned you about, right? You have Attorney General at the time first saying all these bombastic things and then apologizing to the head of the Library Association. And this is a great article. I really recommend it to you. Anyway, she was coming in saying, we want to be responsive to our patrons because we want to make sure we understand what are people taking out and what are the demographics and how can we be responsive to the city of Seattle, right? And that requires data often, but we do not want to hold any of the data ourselves. And so he was just presenting this conundrum to us. And I had people in there from the computer science department, from information school, one from electrical engineering. And first of all, they were really interested. They had no idea that this was a problem that the public library faced. They just didn't know that. And they were super excited about it. And that was already pretty cool. The second thing was that they were able to help the Seattle Public Library realize certain things about its practices that were not quite as secure as they thought. And this is sort of a little inside baseball, but why not? But basically the idea was that the library, as I understand it, was regularly expunging, it was regularly deleting records after people had come and taken out a book. So you come and take out a book material, then you get rid of it. Do you guys do that, by the way, or do you do that too, right? So yes, so maybe you'll have the same moment that the Seattle librarian had when I describe this to you, but the idea is that you don't want to have all that data about your about your users because you don't want people to be able to come get it and so forth. And I think that's perfect, right? So she's saying that's what we do. So we can't analyze it and so forth. And so then the computer researchers started asking some questions. Well, how do you handle holds? How do you handle holds? And she was like, oh, well, we have this hold system, and yeah, we do keep people's names in there for temporarily if they have a hold. But when they come in and get the book, then it's off of the hold and so forth. And anyway, so then the government can't come get that information. And then the computer researcher said, how do you tell people that remind people that their book is on hold. She said, well, we email them. Email them? You email them your book about how to discover a Muslim or how to discover transgender. You email them with their name to their email address, something that we know that the NSA is combing through with every single American. You, the most conscientious body in America about privacy, are emailing people, right? And she said, oh yeah, gosh, that's not okay, right? And so there's this great moment where we figured out we had a research project maybe, they figured out they had a vulnerability, right? And we're going to be able to work together on this. Now, I don't know what the Seattle Public Library is going to do. I don't know whether we're going to end up being able to work with them. But I got to imagine that there are dozens and dozens and dozens of interesting research projects available to you. And I got to imagine that if you were to reach out, you who research so much for us, if you were to reach out to other departments and other students, maybe you already have, and again, I apologize, I don't know, but if you haven't, or if you haven't looked everywhere, there are some interesting research projects that might be helpful to you. So I definitely want to have a chance to do some Q&A, but I did want to mention a couple other small things here. One of the themes that is sort of I feel is emerging in my own sort of thinking that I don't have my mind totally around this yet, but I want to share it with you anyway. One of the themes is that I think is emerging is that there might be kind of a methodology, if you will, and maybe that's too grand a word, but a methodology around the study of emerging technology. And I wanted to share it with you because I think it relates to some of the elements we've been talking about. And the methodology is that when you have a new technology like robotics as an example, right, or the internet before that, that there's a kind of series of steps that you can go through in analyzing it. So that to the extent that professors or others or in your own research you're looking into emerging technology, which I imagine you must do, this is the sort of thing I've been thinking about, which is the first step what you do is you think about what are the essential qualities of that technology. So you think about what is it that makes, say, robotics distinct from previous or constituent technologies like the internet or computers. And then having done that and sort of isolated what is essential about the technology, you ask a follow-up question, which is, what new human possibilities are there? What new human experiences does this technology now permit or allow or mandate or cut off, right? And then finally, so the idea being that with the internet, ubiquitous, asynchronous one-to-one communication or one-to-all communication. This was not a very common sort of thing. It was broadcast model versus one-to-one. Not this, and it was in real time. Not this asynchronous, and that really changed a lot of things. And then with robotics, we have these assumptions about how hard it is to do aerial surveillance that then drones disturb, right? So the idea is like what human experiences are now possible that weren't before, and then finally, what assumptions does the law have about what's possible, right, that no longer hold true? And although this may seem simple, and so I may be a little grand to talk about it as a methodology, this sort of emerges as being a kind of a way to parse through basically emerging technology as a research thing. And so, so we at the lab apply this to various kinds of things like artificial, augmented reality, for instance, robotics, whatever it happens to be. But then the really interesting thing that's occurred for us then in terms of using this sort of, again, I don't know if it's this approach, let's say, to it, is that it's for us it's really come to, for me, let's say, it's really come to crystallize what it is that I'm looking for when I do research into things. Because I'm actually looking, and it allows me to compartmentalize to some extent who I'm asking the questions of. So now what I do, and I don't know if you have experiences with this as well, but now what I end up doing is I end up talking to different libraries first before I end up talking to you guys in the law library. Now maybe I shouldn't do that in a sense because I bet you're perfectly capable of doing the other stuff, but I end up doing this as a way to sort of in my mind. So if I have a question about the state of the art in terms of some particular technology, I will end up actually talking to the libraries that do that. And then when I get to the sort of human experience stuff and the law stuff, then I'll turn to this particular library, and I do that in phases. And I found it to be sort of interesting and fruitful. Although I imagine one day we'll come to a point where sort of everybody's capable of doing everything, but that's sort of been so forth. So that's one sort of lesson, a research lesson that's come to me. And I don't know. Maybe there's a way for us to facilitate that handoff. Because it's a little I had this recent question where I had to look into an economics question. I talked to the economics library, but they ended up not being able to pull the resource that I wanted, but then Grace in our library was able to find it. So there's just and there's a sort of weird communication between the two. But that was an interesting experience where this played out, and I think that the integration could be sort of better for that. And then the second thing is, when we're going to sort of solve the problem, there's this sense of the need for interdisciplinary sort of, I guess what you call it, interdisciplinary pragmatism. And I'll sort of end on this, but interdisciplinary pragmatism is, again, some invented thing to be helpful, but the idea is that rather than bring to bear other literatures and other methods and so forth onto what you're doing, like the way that law and literature does, or law and economics, you actually sort of roll up your sleeves together and solve these problems by talking it through with each other. And again, just to reinforce this point, I feel like this is a story that is immensely about libraries too, because I cannot tell you how many times I sort of hear from my students that they want to get the kind of legal, that are non-law students, that they want to get the kind of legal methods training that you do, and also the role that this library and the library on campus has had in terms of bringing people together, right? So, going from, again, just sort of what it means to be someone researching in an interdisciplinary way these days, the role that the library has had, and then finally sort of how we're trying to come up with the kind of approach or maybe more grand methodology for doing emerging technology. For me, that story has been intricately wrapped up with a librarian and with the resources that you bring to bear. So with that, I would just be happy to say that if you have any questions whatsoever about sort of what law professors some of you are law professors, but what they're thinking about, or any of the work that I'm doing on robotics or drones, artificial intelligence, anything else, or any questions about what I said, I'd be super happy to entertain them. So yeah, thanks very much. Have an awesome rest of your conference, and I hope that you have some questions for me. Thank you.
My colleague Jay and I have mics. We're filming this, or actually recording it. So anyway, if you have a question, if you would let us know, we'll have a mic, Jay. Thanks. And Lenny, did you get these turned on for us?
We heard the clapping.
Yeah, you did. I don't hear a...
I'll speak. Give it a try.
Okay, just shout it.
My question is, I noticed, I did a brief survey of state drone laws.
Oh,
I
yeah.
noticed that almost all of them deal with the use of drones by governments rather than by private individuals. And I personally was a little surprised by this. And do you think that this reflects in any way a permanent trend, or a permanent character of people's concerns with drones? Or do you think that this will expand and include laws dealing with private use of drones?
So I don't know if everybody heard that, because I'm not sure if that was working correctly, but the question was that in researching state laws around drones, and what was your name, I'm sorry?
Lewis.
Lewis is saying that in researching state law around drones, what he's found has been that most of them tend to apply to the government use of drones. And the question is whether we'll see an expansion of that to the private use of drones. I think we will, but I actually think there's a couple of reasons why you might only find right now government use of drones, state statutes, and why we haven't seen private use of drones. And they're specific. They're these. Number one, you tend to get sort of stranger bedfellows and easier coalitions around government surveillance than you do around private. Because everybody's concerned about government surveillance seemingly, but only certain constituencies are concerned about private. There are people sort of who have a First Amendment bent, or pro-innovation bent, or whatever it happens to be. hobbyists and so forth who are against placing limits on what people do who are citizens. So that's one of the political will is one issue. Another big issue is the fact that until relatively recently, we've seen very little movement on the Federal Aviation Administration permitting the domestic use of drones by private entities. And so the way it worked was that initially when drones came out, the Federal Aviation Administration, for lack of a better word, sort of freaked out about it. And they were like, oh my God, no. You know what I mean? And so they said nobody can use these things. And they said, well, you know, not nobody. I mean, if you got your own little drone in your backyard and you're far away from people and you keep it within line of sight, you're like a hobbyist, then you can use it. But you can't use it for commercial purpose and you can't use it near people, right? And that remains today basically what's going on. So if you try to use it to take a video of this campus, the FAA can send you a letter and then try to fine you. What's happening now is that the FAA is slowly allowing commercial uses. The first was in Alaska, the second was in Hollywood. It's very intransparent. It's hard to understand exactly like why the FAA is letting certain people and not others use it. It seems to kind of be weirdly mapped around to like political clout. So like the energy sector can use it, and now Hollywood can use it, and I'm just expecting like Wall Street will be able to use drones next or something. But anyway, point is not a lot of people can use them, but there are some live issues in the courts about whether or not these fines are okay and whether or not the FAA has gone through adequate process in order to restrict this drone activity. So my point is that once people start to use drones more and more and more, right, then you might imagine that that we'll see more restrictions that are private entities because you'll see more private use that bothers people. And there's yet a third reason why you might see more state action around public use, and that's because there's a little bit of question about whether the states can control the airways at all, right? I mean, the FAA claims this. We run the sky, guys. Whatever happens on the ground or like a little bit above the ground, that's on you. But we control the skies. And so one thing that states can certainly do is control the behavior of their own employees, right? So if it's a state employee, a public and municipal employee, that can be regulated. Now, I've made a couple arguments in this space. Not that you asked, but I'm going to expand a little bit. I've made a couple arguments in this space, and one of them has been, look, why drones? Why flying robots, right? So almost every state law, and correct me, Liz, if I'm wrong about this, every state law tends to have a definition that is flying, unmanned. Basically, it's unmanned aerial systems. It's pegged to the Federal Aviation Administration definition, okay? And as a person who looks at robotics closely, I can tell you there are all kinds of innovations that don't fly, right? There are robots that climb the side of buildings. There are robots, one of which is the company is owned by Google, called the Flea, that's like a little unit like this big. It jumps 40 feet into the air and can then drive around on top of a building, like drive around on a roof. You should see the video of this thing. It is frightening. It's like just jumps into the air. You're like, oh my God, it looks like a toaster. And yet, anyway, there are robots that officers are using where they throw a ball into like a middle of a scene and the ball takes all these different pictures, like something out of Star Wars. I mean, it is unbelievable. And yet, these people are expending their political capital on surveillance around. I mean, if you're the law enforcement and you find out you can't use drones for what you want to do, just get a pole or a weather balloon or one of these things that, you know what I mean? It sort of reminds me of, this is a way out there, but why not, right? So it sort of reminds me of, like, you remember in like The Wizard of Oz, you had the flying monkeys or whatever, you know? And so, you know, if you can imagine like the sort of Oz gets tired of the flying monkeys and they're bothering everybody, they're really mischievous, and the flying monkeys, they go back to the witch and they say, I'm sorry, we cannot harass the citizens of Oz anymore. And she's like, why not? She's like, well, they passed this ordinance against, flying monkeys, and now we can't do what we're doing. And she goes back and she's like, just walk. You know what I mean? It's just like, it sort of reminds me of that. So that's one of the things I think is really myopic about the drone legislation right now. Yeah, in the back.
So you've talked about working cross-disciplinary between law and technology. As we're looking at the intersections of new technologies, to what extent are you trying to bring in people from other disciplines, say philosophy and particularly ethics within philosophy, looking at the human impact and whether or not just because we can do it, we should do it, and to what extent can those ethical concerns inform the law?
Yeah, that is a fabulous question, and one that we are confronting squarely right now, right head on in this robotics law community. I will say that we were very self-conscious at the Tech Policy Lab to explicitly layer that in. And so where I said one of my collaborators is from the computer science department, the other is Batya Friedman from the information school, who is the pioneer of so-called value-sensitive design and is an ethicist, in essence, right? And on her faculty are people like Adam Moore, who's a philosopher, and so forth. So Batya is our design ethics voice. We wanted to integrate that directly into what we're doing. So if we look at augmented reality, for instance, we look at the computer science, what is augmented reality, what could it be? We look at the law, what are the repercussions of architecting augmented reality one way or another? And then Batya and her students will look at the impact of augmented reality on certain populations or the ethical ramifications of augmented reality. Or do you see what I mean? And so it is difficult because that's yet another language you have to integrate, but I think it's absolutely central. The other thing I would say is that we didn't make very good choices. I'm part of this annual Robotics Law and Policy Conference, colloquially known as We Robot, but it's actually the West East. It's the Robotics Law and Policy Conference. It's now in its 4th year. It'll be here at University of Washington in April, and we wanted to bring together technologists and lawyers and policymakers, right? Just like what I just said, just that, and that's who came out initially. And then increasingly, we got these great paper submissions from ethicists or people, you know what I mean? And we're just like, oh man, this was really dumb. And so now, even now, we are getting these great papers and including these great papers from ethicists. And so now we are deepening our benches. We've had philosophers and folks who do psychology and ethics and so forth coming out of the woodwork, but not because we were particularly adept about it. And even now, if I'm going to be honest, our program committee is not deep on the ethics question. We have 3 or 4 law professors, 3 or 4 people from electrical engineering or computer science, and nobody who does pure ethics, and that's a gap, that I reminded again by your question that we need to address. But at least in the lab, we're handling it. But the short answer is, it's crucial. You bring them in from the very beginning. You make sure they have the relevant training. Absolutely, that's the right way to do it. I don't know if that's responsive, but yeah.
It's just curious because I was a philosopher before I was a librarian and a lawyer. And I think particularly the new technologies, just because we can create a robot that, I don't know, jumps on top of a building and can do it.
Yeah.
And we're thinking, whatever laws we're thinking about, I think we do have to think about the human consequences of those and look at the moral element of it as well.
Yeah, I would just say that there's a couple people that jump out to me as being really, really good in this space. And if you were interested in learning more, Evan Selinger, who is a philosopher at Rutgers, and Patrick Lin, who's a philosopher at Cal Poly, and Aejung Moon, she's at British Columbia, and Kate Darling. There's people now who are really good on this issue. And in fact, I remember when I first, there's my coffee. Hiding on me, this coffee, terrible. All right, sorry. But I remember when I first did this, I made the mistake of making some comments to a reporter years ago about this new field of robot law and everything else. And I got a really interesting email from a robot ethicist who said, "We've been doing robot ethics since 2001. Where were you?" And I thought, well, that's pretty fair, you know what I mean? And by the guy who turned out to be just about the nicest guy. And so, one has to be sort of very careful. But the robot ethics folks, especially out of Italy, have been real first movers. The problem is that you can't just have ethics in a vacuum. You need the law and policy because that's where the rubber meets the road. You know what I mean? So they were missing something too, in fairness. But you need all of it. Because they're not conterminists. It's not as though ethics and law are somehow subdivisions of one another. You should come to the conference, April 10 and 11.
Hi, my question has to do with, you mentioned a hold on books, sent an email about a hold on books, but isn't the real gap in digital research in terms of privacy? Because, I get emails from law firms and at the bottom it says this is confidential communication, but they emailed it to me. Email them back. The vendors have great firewalls and security, I'm sure, but nevertheless, I'm sending out questions and I'm downloading stuff and I'm getting all this stuff. So yeah, I'm sort of cynical about things, but wouldn't you say there's no such thing as privacy? Really? If somebody really wants to get to the stuff?
Gosh, I hope that. I hope not. I mean, it's certainly the case. It's certainly the case that if you do hold information in any form, email, in your database, whatever, with adequate process, adequate, a little loaded, with sort of enough process, right, the government's going to be able to get it. And in that sense, no, there's no privacy. But, it is actually, there's a significant barrier. I mean, so if you think about the way that libraries kept records in the past, you might have like a book with all the people's names on it who checked it out, or a card with all the people's names on it in the back, so that really if you wanted to figure out who read what, you could do so. But what is the FBI going to do? Go to every library and look at every card? Of course not, right? And it was the digitization of this that made it possible to do this kind of dragnet kind of search. So the question in part should be whether you created this honeypot, this repository that is attractive to the government. And I don't think there are too many. I mean, there are, that's what people are freaking out about right now, is the idea that everything, all the internet traffic, every single thing, right, is part of this sort of honeypot that the NSA can do. Hopefully that will help to cabin that. But I don't think it means that privacy is dead. I've come increasingly, so I've been writing about privacy for longer than I've been writing about robotics. I have very concrete views about a variety of things within privacy, especially commercial privacy as against the consumer. Some very concrete views about that. Recently, the University of Chicago asked me to write an essay about this question. And so I'm still thinking through this question. But I'll tell you what my present thinking is, although it didn't necessarily go so well last time when I did that. But I'll tell you what my present thinking is. I tend to go a little off the rails when I talk about things that I'm still thinking about. But I'm thinking that what's happening today, it feels like, at one level, the writ of assistance that happened in the colonial period that led to the Fourth Amendment in the first place. So what I mean by that is that the thing that we were really upset about in the United States was the fact that the British would have like these writs of assistance where basically they just show you a piece of paper and it just meant you got to cooperate in every way. It wouldn't say anything in particular about what they were looking for, but you got to open up your store to us and your books to us, and we're just going to look for stuff. Maybe you're not paying taxes, maybe you're this, maybe you're that. You know what I mean? And that's what really freaked us out. And that's why the Fourth Amendment not only requires reasonableness to issue the warrant and a warrant itself, but that you describe things with particularity. That's a huge part of the Fourth Amendment, that you describe things with particularity, as you know. And what I'm seeing now is a kind of digital writ of assistance, a kind of electronic writ of assistance, where they're just sort of helping themselves to anything they want with no particularity. And I worry that it's going to transition from a privacy issue of looking for every single thing that's coming through the transom everywhere they can and trying to isolate what's wrong, to actually directing libraries, maybe corporations, maybe other kinds of institutions, to look for stuff for them that they've adjudged to be unlawful. And what I mean by that transition is, there was a story about Google, and Google is running all of its attachments by the database by the National something exploited youth. What is that? The National
Center for Missing and Exploited.
The National Center for Missing and Exploited Youth. They keep a database, by the way, God bless them, of all child pornography that's known, and then Google will run that database, everything by the database, in order to find child pornography, and then will report it to the government. By the way, I'm all for that, right? I'm cool, I'm good with that. But then when that happened, reporters started asking questions, and the questions were questions like, what about, like, could you look for like someone planning a burglary? And Google's like, well, no, we never look for anybody planning a burglary, right? Well, what about copyrighted material? Could you look for like copyrighted material? Well, we could look for copyrighted material. You know what I mean? It's just like this sort of strange thing, right? And so, and in fact, in a way, they kind of do that with Content ID, right? And so, where's the line, right? And what's really interesting about the Fourth Amendment jurisprudence, and what people often sleep on this question, is everybody understands, like, you know, privacy in public is changing. We're getting rid of the third-party doctrine that says just because you commit something to some third party like Google doesn't mean you get up all the expectation of privacy in it. But the thing that keeps coming back and back again is the idea that you don't have any reasonable expectation of privacy in contraband. Meaning that if something's already unlawful, right, you don't get, it's not even a search to look for just that. And obviously the consummate example is dog sniffing, right? So the idea is that if you sniff somebody's car, turns out their apartment, their person, and you look only for yes or no, do they have marijuana on them, or not here, but anyway, yes or no, do they have cocaine on them, right? Then that's not even a search because you don't have any reasonable expectation of privacy in contraband. It's not, by the way, it's not just dogs. There's a case, Jacobson, involving field testing of cocaine. And so in that case, there was something coming through customs, it spilled, it was a white powder, they brought the feds in, the feds took this stick, and the stick, only turns blue if it's cocaine or pregnant. But no, it's cocaine. And so they show this in the stick. It shows that it's cocaine, and that's not found to be a search because all it does is alert to whether or not it's contraband, right? If you take that to its natural algorithmic conclusion, it would be feasible for us to spot a whole range of activity that we know to be unlawful and to force institutions, including yours, to report that back to the government. That is where I think the death of privacy starts to feel like a real issue. It's a real issue now, but that really concerns me, that trend. And so I'm going to write about this for Chicago. We'll see how it goes. If you guys find any research related to this, RCALO, I'm sorry, I had to do it. I feel terrible. Other questions? So I do privacy, robotics, anything betwixt and between. Yeah.
Not so much a question, but a comment with an example. On my way, I work at Cincinnati, and our airport's across the border in northern Kentucky, so I don't remember which state's laws they were discussing, but on the public radio station yesterday morning, they were talking about either Ohio or Kentucky feeling the need to update their don't text while driving law, and the rationale was that when it was written, it only expressly prohibited texting and handheld phone use during a conversation. And of course, they're saying now people are doing Facebook and tweeting, so we have to expand the law to cover these things. And my own, and by the way, I think using a device for anything while you're driving is just horrible. When I'm waiting for the bus every day, I see people who either almost have accidents or hold up traffic because they're doing it. My thinking is, why are you thinking so specifically? Why not just have a reasonably worded distracted driving law that says both your hands will be on the wheel and your eyes will not be looking at any electronic device that's not directly related to alerting you to road conditions?
Well,
I'm sure there are problems with that, but the nature of the discussion on the report made it sound like the legislator or the DOT representative was still thinking about trying to just draw up a list as opposed to the concept.
I hear you, right? So you hear this a lot. This is a complaint that I think if it's a complaint, it's an issue that comes up again and again and again with technology governance. And the idea is that we write laws in a particular technological context, and that context will change on us, right? One great example is that we've been trying to update the Electronic Communications Privacy Act. Okay, this is the act that governs electronic communication privacy, as the title suggests. It was written in 1986. Okay, before Al Gore invented the internet, and so it's very different. And people are saying it doesn't make any sense, and they're saying it doesn't make any sense in concrete ways. So one example, my favorite, is if you have something in storage for 180 days, and like say you just just a few months in storage, you need a warrant to get it. But 181 days, you just needed an administrative subpoena. Administrative subpoena doesn't go to a judge. It's just sort of like, I want this. Here's my subpoena, right? I mean, that's basically what it looks like. That doesn't make any sense anymore. It was written at a time when storage was very costly relative to today, and the idea was that if you had something in 180 days, you don't want that. It's like abandoning it. You know what I mean? And so people want to update that. The problem is, on the other side, is that it's the deep problem between rules versus standards. If you just use a standard, right, then people are not going to be sure what they can and can't do. Do you know what I mean? And so, and so that's why the Federal Trade Commission is charged with and been so successful with enforcing unfair and deceptive practice as against technology. What does that mean? You know what I mean? And they've been but then on the other side, people have pushed back and said, companies don't know what they're supposed to be doing. There's no regulations here. You're stifling innovation. And so it's a problem. I tell my students that line drawing is one of the most endemic issues. And the reason I'm pointing to my coffee again is because the example I like to use is the idea that I found myself one day getting out of my car and dumping the small remainder of my coffee into like a park that I was parked next to. And then I thought to myself, am I littering? And I don't know the answer. And yet littering is something everybody knows, and every jurisdiction has a anti-littering law, and it says something specific about what litter is. And yet, this simple act that people do all the time, I don't know what it falls under, And so it's not just a technology problem, this line drawing issue, but it's particularly highlighted by technology. Texting is a great example. Did you know that the Nevada driverless car law, which I helped I advised them on a version of it. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But there's a story behind that where they write this definition of driverless cars that is terrible, and then they have to cross it out and then rewrite it because there was this concern about that. Literally, they repealed the law and wrote the law over. But one interesting thing about it is that it says our anti-texting rule doesn't apply if you're in a driverless car. Right? So that's the other side of the coin, right? Where suddenly something that was a problem isn't a problem anymore. And that's about the definition of a car, not the definition of texting. Oh, she's got the mic already. I'm sorry, you're out. Plus, we heard from you already.
Well, you sort of already answered my question, which is, as the policy lab, do you consult with governments or advocacy groups who are trying to catch up with their legislation?
Yes, we do, and in fact, that's a core part of the mission, but we haven't done that very much. So what I mean by this is, so we were founded over a year ago through a generous grant, I should say, from Microsoft, $1.7 million. And we were supposed to have this sort of 3-4 year cycle. In the first year, we just kind of figured out how to work together. Do you know what I mean? All this rambling I did about process, what is our approach, how do we work together? How do we solve problems of authorship? That's what we did in the first year. So in the first year, we produced some really great research, and I mean objectively, and I'm not involved in it necessarily personally, but we won a Best Paper Award. We placed articles in various top journals and so forth. We did a good job, I think, of the research side of it, but we haven't been very public. And now we're trying to cultivate those relationships with, especially federal lawmakers and so forth. And so we had someone from the OSTP, the Office of Science, Technology Policy, OSTP, the White House come through here. We had FTC Commissioner Julie Brill come through here. We're trying to be much more outward-facing because ultimately our goal is to be a resource for policymakers. They can come to us. They're not worried about industry having a particular view. They have interdisciplinarity all in one place. And so that's our goal. That's our end game. But we're really not there. And we're just starting to sort of move that direction. But it's a very astute question. Yeah. I don't want to go into your break too much, but I'm happy to answer questions as long as you want. Yeah.
I remember reading recently an article about a guy who had come up with a method to scan the sewage input with lasers to determine whether it contained the metabolized compounds from drug use, and that he could identify almost on a house-by-house basis where people were using different drugs.
Oh man, that's a great example. Would you seriously send that to me? I mean, all jokes aside about research, I would really appreciate to see that example. And other ones. Yeah.
It made me think that perhaps the traditional legal framework of considering privacy as a area in which you have an expectation, and then the state can't penetrate that area, may be becoming a useless way of protecting the goal of protecting privacy. And that the state might say, who cares, what you do in your house? We'll just surround you completely in all the ways you can communicate with society and aggregate all that information, and we'll be able to know exactly what's going on in the house without violating your privacy.
I think we can say that we've abandoned that sewage. I mean, I would abandon it.
Well, yeah, I mean, one under-examined change of technology that affects privacy is the ability to take stuff that was meaningless before and suddenly turn it into a treasure trove of information. So, like, you can add technology to, like, you can create a traffic light camera, so that now you can catch people blowing through the light, and that's sort of this kind of surveillance where you're creating a way to catch people, right? But you can take an ordinary room that was just meaningless to somebody 50 years ago today, and then just tell an amazing story. So for instance, we're constantly shedding our DNA all the time. And our ability to just entirely sequence this DNA and to figure out who you're related to and everything else, that has revolutionized, that. And so suddenly DNA becomes this thing that, although we're all shedding it all the time as part of being out in the world, it's suddenly this treasure trove of information. Sewage. Who cares, right? Sewage. Get out of my house, sewage. You know what I mean? But yet now all of a sudden it can be subject to these things. So there's a way that technology changes mundane, ordinary things, takes rooms, turns them into crime scenes, that is also interesting. But yeah, I mean, one of the most sort of interesting and profound Fourth Amendment cases everyone knows about is Calo, which is the case where you're doing thermal imaging of the home. And it's not entirely sure. I don't think the justices themselves totally understood whether they were drawing a distinction about being able to see inside the house or not. In other words, whether the problem in Calo, which was that that officers were using a thermal imaging to scan the house to see whether people were growing marijuana, right? That was the issue in Calo. And whether or not, by doing so, they were violating the reasonable expectation of privacy of the people inside. And the court came to, I think, the right conclusion, which is that you do need a warrant to scan someone's house with heating, but for the wrong reasons. They thought they were looking inside of the house. Justice Scalia has this line about you can find out intimate details about the home, like when the lady of the house is having her sauna. It's just like the weirdest thing to say in like 2001, it's like sort of a weird thing to say, but anyway, leading Jenny Suka at Yale to write this great essay in response that's entitled "Is Privacy a Woman?" And it's yeah. But anyway, the point of the matter is he had this mental model of looking inside of the house, but in fact, if you look at the actual images, right, it's just red on it's in the exterior. The whole way thermal imaging works is to get emanations that come out of the house. If the heat were only in the house, turns out thermal imaging wouldn't see it. You know what I mean? And so. So we came to the right conclusion there, but maybe for sort of the wrong reasons. And I'm really interested in what you can do, where this technology is headed. There are things that you could scan somebody to see if they have a weapon. There's chemical sensors where you can fly around seeing who's cooking meth. I mean, there's all these things you can do now that you couldn't do before. So again, I don't want to get too far into your break here, but I just want to say I really appreciated this, and thank you for the opportunity, and nice to talk to you. Thanks a lot. Oh, thank you so much. Thanks, John.
And Bonnie and I want to make a quick announcement. We need to get to the break. Visit the blenders. The vendors. This card is from Rechanging and doing VP. She just had a kid a week ago. Aaron, boy or girl? Boy. Boy, Aaron. And so we're going to give her this card. And then we got her a really special gift. I thought this would be very appropriate for a little kid. Nice white. So enjoy your break.
We have our break today sponsored by Heinz, so we really appreciate their sponsorship today. So thanks, Steve Roses, for that. And also, please visit all of our vendors. They've all graciously sponsored and agreed to join us today. So come by and say hello and enjoy some coffee and snacks outside.